My name's Larry. My wife Kendra, she's going to be coming here sometime. I'm from Amish country, Holmes County. Same place as Paul and Cindy, Jake. Yeah, great. Great to be with you guys. So this is what we're going to do in this next hour. So I'm going to share the vision, the 50 by 2030 vision, and then Ron Empleton, who is a church planting practitioner. We asked Ron to walk us through some of his journey in church planting. He's planted churches. He has credibility. He knows what it takes. And to walk us through some of his insights, some of the things that he's learned. And then we're going to do some Q&A at the end. I mean, also during Ron's presentation, if you have questions, you're fine to just ask them. But we'll have a little time at the end to do some Q&A. And then we're going to commission all of you at the end to go and plant new disciple-making churches.
Amen.
Does that sound okay? So yeah, let's pray together. God, thank you so much for the awesome responsibility, privilege that you've given to the Church of Jesus to make Jesus famous. And God, in this weekend when we're together, to being stirred again, to have more fervor and zeal for evangelism. God, would you in this session help us to see the importance of planting new disciple-making churches. And I thank you for each person that's in this room. We invite your Holy Spirit to continue to help us to discover, Lord, what is on your heart and how to evangelize and reach people with the gospel, to make disciples, and to invite every person to be a part of this great narrative that you're writing. And we commit our time to you in Christ's name. Amen. So this sheet is this is really our vision. In the last couple of years, I've been The last couple of years, I've been working with a church planting team, and we spent a lot of time just having conversations with churches, pastors, and this is what we call our vision frame. And what this is, you see, the mission, everything is on this sheet has grown out of our mandate from CMC to plant churches. And so this is not anything that's separate from the mature and multiply, but it's an expression of. Our mission is to mature and multiply churches locally, globally, everywhere. And so what we're doing as a church planting team is aligned and is an expression of that. So our mission for planting churches, there you see what it says, calling churches to a culture of multiplication through church planting. Then our strategy to rediscover, to call, assess, equip, send, and celebrate. Hey, Jerry. There you go. Oh, yeah. And then our values, bold obedience, urgent multiplication, reproducible processes, and then some of our marks and measures. People praying, disciples discipling, leaders launching, churches starting, and communities changing. Then you notice in the center of this vision, 50 by 2030. So we felt like, we wanted to, here you go. We wanted to set a quantitative goal because we really want to plant churches, and we want to plant new disciple-making churches. And we've spent some time thinking through, like when we say church planting, everybody has sort of in their mind what they think about. But the way we're using church planting is not just services on a weekend, but it's moving into an entire community, changing a community with the gospel, serving, living there, sharing the gospel, making disciples. And the ultimate sort of outcome of making disciples is a church that will be planted. And so the way we came up with the 50 by 2030, 50 new disciple-making churches by 2030 is that we talked to all of the pastors in CMC, or lead elder, or whoever, if they didn't have a pastor, and we asked the question, what is God doing in your church? What do you feel like God is, what does multiplication look like? Where are you at on this journey? And the number 50 came out of those conversations. It wasn't just something that we pulled out randomly. But we think that with God's help by 2030, we want to see at least 50 new disciple-making churches being planted. Now, that's not to restrict what God could do. He might plant 100. You know, if we could reproduce like they do in other countries, there's a rapid multiplication. But simply wanting to, this is the vision. The vision is for God to raise up church planters and for churches to multiply the gospel by planting new disciple-making churches. And this is one of the ways that we evangelize and impact other communities. And so this is the vision, and we're just getting started with this. There's so much work to be done, and what's been encouraging is to see how that God is preparing churches in CMC to do this. We recognize that some churches are more ready to plant than others. And but all of us, need to be thinking about what does multiplication look like in our church. I like what Doug said a lot in one of his sessions. It was the session right after lunch. He said that most churches are inward focused. And a great exercise for church leadership teams and pastors is to spend some time evaluating how much of our resources are inwardly focused and how much are outwardly focused. And what did he say? 80%? 85, 90? A high percentage of everything we have as churches is for the already saved. And for us to say, okay, what does it mean for us to be outward focused? And what if one of the most important things that we do as a network of churches in the next 10 years is plant new disciple-making churches? Because if we don't start new churches, somebody started the church that you're pastoring or that you're attending or are part of. And if we don't plant new disciple-making churches, and you notice I use those phrases together because sometimes we want to separate them. Disciple-making and church planting, but it's really one and the same. When Jesus said, go and make disciples, he was thinking churches that would be planted because disciples are being made, that are discipling others and discipling others and discipling others. But if CMC does not plant new disciple-making churches, we will eventually cease to exist. And the need is great, and we are so passionate about this vision. This isn't the only thing that we're doing, that God is doing in CMC, but in the next decade, we believe this will be one of the most significant things that we do, is to multiply the gospel by planting new disciple-making churches. And so Ron Empleton is the guy that he recently has sort of come back to CMC, but he's been a part of our network for a lot of years, and he has planted
First 2 churches in the last 10 years.
Yeah, 2 churches in the last 10 years, and wanted to for him just to share some of his journey and story and some principles that I think can be helpful to us as we could continue this conversation about church planting.
Thank you, Larry, and good afternoon. And as I look around the room this afternoon, a lot of memories flood in because Alvin Mast was my foreman before I left Warfel Construction and pursued an apprenticeship in church planting. And he allowed me to learn and taught me a lot about heavy equipment operation. And believe it or not, throughout our years of church planting, that has come in handy. There have been times throughout the last 30 years where I've had to get on a backhoe again or on a bulldozer to help provide for my family. And so, as you're sitting back there, Alan, I don't know what you're expecting or anticipating to hear from me today, but I just say thank you for teaching me a lot of things about life and work ethic. I've never seen anybody work as hard as this man. He would drive into a job and hit the ground running, and that meant I had to run after him. And lunch was taken in between shifting gears to the next job. And we had a blast. We laughed a lot, and it's great. So it's great to have you here. I look over here in the back row and I see David Cohen, and it was about when he was born that I met Wanda, and she had declared that she would never marry someone from Delaware, nor would she marry a preacher. Those in the back row probably say, Ron, we never thought you'd be a preacher. There are many people from Delaware have told me that. And so I'm still working on that one. And yet it's great to see, as I look back, what God had in mind when He made me, and I'm still learning. Because I never, I wanted to be an athlete, and I wanted to be a cowboy. Well, I failed at being an athlete, and I ended up being a shepherd. So God had some things in mind there that I'm still learning about. And yet, I rejoice that God has a plan. He had a plan for my life, and that plan is still working out, and He has a plan for each of you. It's been an interesting journey. Back in 1985, Juan and I had left our career jobs. I was the foreman in the same company by then that Eugene was, or Alvin. I call him Jeannie. He introduced himself as Alvin, right? So
I think I introduced myself as Gene.
Gene.
I'm not sure, and I don't want to maybe doubt my name.
Alvin Eugene, okay? So, I was working for him. Wanda, my new wife at the time, was working as a nurse, a brand new nurse. And there were those who told us they thought we were kind of crazy to walk away from two good jobs. And because we were offered an opportunity in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to serve as church planter apprentices. I was on a journey to figure out what God wanted me to do with my life. Maybe you're on that journey. Maybe you're asking those questions. What am I supposed to do? Ephesians says that God has a plan, and I believe He does. But we know that in God's greater plan, that He is not willing that any should perish, but that all come to repentance. And He is a dynamic God, a God of multiplication. We see that in creation, and we see that throughout His church as well. And if I were to say, what is the ultimate fruit of an apple tree, what would you say? Is it an apple, or is it the seeds inside that create another apple tree? Everything about God's creation, whether it's an apple tree or it's you and your spouse, there's the potential of having more little ones running around who will grow up, and God forbid that they fail to launch in our homes, right? We want them to grow up, find a spouse, and marry and produce grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's God's design for our families. In church, I firmly believe that God's design for us, that we see in the Great Commission, is to go and make disciples. And each one of us go and make disciples. We're going to have families of disciples. We're going to have groups of disciples. And He says, go, not come. He says, everyone, not some. And He says, make disciples, not church attenders or just believers, but make disciples of all nations. A disciple is someone who is doing what? Discipling others. It's all about God's plan. So what does that have to do with me and with you and with planting churches? Well, for us, in 1985, we stopped at San Antonio for DTS. That was evangelism training with Elton Delagrange. Was that your father? Uncle. And so we were there during that historical 13.5-inch snowfall that hit San Antonio. We were living with a single lady who was a midwife. She was a practitioner of that. I guess I'm a practitioner of church planting. But we were called out that night she had to go deliver a baby, someone's sixth baby, 27 years old, I think, and she was on her sixth child. But anyway, long story short, we remember those. Those were very vivid memories on our way to Albuquerque. We arrived in Albuquerque. Gary Troyer introduced himself to us and gave us a few days to settle in. And then he called me one night and said, well, it's time to get started. And I'm thinking, well, we just got here. He said, well, it's time to, we're going to meet and we're going to go knock on doors. what? I'm in a Latin community, and what's going to happen? And a lot of feeling welled up inside of me, and I think it probably welled up inside of Juan as well, because here she was dealing with the fact that I was responding to a call to ministry, and she had married a guy from Delaware, and then I had taken her out of Delaware to Albuquerque, and she wasn't sure what was going to happen next. But that began 8 years of Albuquerque where we made a lot of mistakes. We also learned how to knock on doors. Gary taught us how to teach Bible studies. He showed us, and then he charged us to do the same, and he mentored us and answered our questions and handled our enthusiasm when we landed that first Bible study. And then he began to teach us how to lead worship. He coached me how to preach my first sermon, and I think he probably shook his head and said, wow, I think I better keep preaching. But by the end of that first year, Juan and I knew that we had discovered the beginning of God's plan for us. And that was to be on mission with God. And that was to be in church planting. And 2 Timothy 2:2. Can anyone quote that verse? 2 Timothy 2:2 is Paul writing to Timothy saying, the things that you have heard me teach to faithful men, that they in turn may teach others. That's 4 generations. That's multiplication, folks. How is it 4? Paul to Timothy to others, that they in turn may train others. That was Paul's charge to Timothy. And Gary's simplified it this way. Ron, I want you to work yourself out of a job. Well, wait a minute. Aren't I going to be the pastor of West Mesa Christian Outreach? Storefront? Coors Boulevard? Southwest quadrant of Albuquerque? Where there weren't a lot of blonde-haired white people. A lot of gang activity and things like that. And we stayed there, continued to work, and we saw God work in spite of us. We kind of outgrew the storefront and bought an old church building, and were in it for a few years, and hosted the Gospel Echoes and the Rosedale Corral and work teams and that kind of thing. And Gary, in the meantime, went on and he planted a Spanish church. And they outgrew the garage that they began to meet in, and they bought some land, and it was more land than they needed, so that together we started a school, an ACE school that continues to this day. And then they said, Ron, why don't you come build the next phase of our 15-year building project, and we'll have the Spanish church, and you come build the English church, we'll give you the property. Well, that sounded too good to be true, and based on the fact that I had building experience and I continued to work for Gary in remodeling, we were able to test for and become our own commercial contractors. And so, yes, I dug the water lines in on the backhoe and ran the heavy equipment, building the pad and that kind of thing. And we built a building in Albuquerque that Living Word Christian Outreach, the church that we changed the name when we moved up on the mesa there, and continues today. Lauren and Sharon Miller, Lauren is the pastor, and just a dear church. The school is there, daycare, and it continues. It hasn't become a mega church or anything like that, but it continues today to minister and preach the Word of God, and that was the beginning of our story. And then after 8 years, we had the brand new building, we had a local team in place, and I turned it over to them, and I brought the family. We had 4 children by then, and we came back to Rosedale and wanted to get a little more training. We felt like, hey, we kind of jumped into that without a lot of training. By then, Richard Showalter was president of our RBC, and he mentored us, and we met Don Richardson and Howard Norrish and people like that of unreached people groups, and God was slowly turning our hearts towards the 1040 window. And yet to go there, I needed an English degree. So long story short, Malone accepted my credits from RBC on probation, and that if I made the grade, they'd consider it. And the Lord opened doors. We moved to Hartville, assistant pastor at Maple Grove at that time. Went to school for 2 years, finished a language and lit degree. Wheaton got certified to teach English as a foreign language. And off we jetted to Turkey discovering just before we left that Wanda was pregnant with our 5th child. That said, we spent 8 years in Turkey. Alex came along. He just graduated from Kent State. He's 22 years old. $350 if you want to have a cheap baby, just go to Turkey. Anyway, just a lot of things happened. And then as I see Lloyd and Joyce here, they were part of the Turkey team. And so I'm thinking, okay, they know about church planting and house churches and that kind of thing. They can teach us a thing or two. So there's all kinds of wealth of knowledge and information and experience in this room. Here's Nate Olmsted here, and but anyway, our story continued. Along the way, we made mistakes. In 2002, I resigned from RMM over in Turkey, frustrated with differences in ministry and philosophy and things like that. Continued to work with missionaries, but I was angry and cynical. And in 2004, after the towers came down, and by then I was no longer teaching English. I was running a company out of San Jose, California, a branch company. The Lord had allowed us to set that up and travel all over Turkey, and we continued to help start house churches and disciple people. But we came back to Hartville because we were invited to do so by the HRM Corporation. That's the hardware and the restaurant and all that's there. And they offered us a job. And so our oldest was 18. And so that began a new phase of our journey. And we were with Maple Grove for about 4 more years. And I ended up teaching school at Lake Center, teaching Bible. Through that, I met some students, got introduced to more pastors. And Maranatha Bible Church approached us about 11 years ago and said, we're looking for church planters. And it's no mistake that you're attending here. And at that point we were, because Maple Grove had said we're not interested in planting churches. And I was working through some major things, and I had come to a point in my life when I just cried out to God and said, God, because I have to tell you this. I left the Middle East, like I said, frustrated and angry and feeling like I needed to be recognized and needed respect, and I was just puffed up. And basically God communicated to me. He said, Ron, I can't use you this way. And when I reached the point where I said, God, I just want to serve you again. I don't need any respect. I don't need to be recognized. I just want to be a vessel that you can use. It was like he said, okay. And he opened the door again and allowed us to be approached by Maranatha Bible Church of Northeast Ohio. They were looking for church planters, and we were invited and hired to come back and start planting churches with them. Now, that's part of my journey. It's not part of the journey that I'm proud of in any way. But God was working on me. And those things needed to happen. Because He will not use someone who is full of themselves. Nor will He use a denomination who are full of ourselves. But He will use those who want to seek the kingdom first and to exalt Him and give Him all the glory. And we often talk about Matthew 28:19, 18 to 20, the Great Commission, and it's truth and it's powerful. And yet Jesus said something to Peter and the disciples. He said, "Who do men say that I am?" And Peter, for once, didn't stick his foot in his mouth. He said, "You're the Christ. Come from God. You're the Son of God." And Jesus said, "Peter, I tell you the truth. It's on this rock that I'll build my church." And that just grips me, that Jesus said, "I will build my church." Has He changed His mind? No. He is not willing that any should perish. He will build and is building His church. And to the disciples He said, "In your going, make disciples. And I'll be with you always." So it's with that premise that we come back and we begin to talk about church planting. And there we were in 2008. The economy was getting ready to crash. And they sent me out to plant a church in a place called Brimfield. Brimfield, Ohio is just south of Kent. Kent is the city of Kent State University. There we were, just south of Kent State in the town of Brimfield. I didn't know anybody there. As I began to do a survey and discover who was there, I heard many times, well, churches just want our money. Churches are full of scandal. We've seen you guys come and go. Good luck with that. You won't plant another church here. There were churches in Brimfield, just 7,500 people in the Brimfield proper. But just north of us, Kent State, 33,000 students. Was I going to believe that God could start a church or not? So I say in spite of us, or because we stepped out in faith, believing that God wanted a church there, we stepped out and we began to practice what we had learned in Albuquerque. We began to build relationships. I don't know how many of you were in Doug Pollock's sessions today, but some of the things, if I had time today, I would talk to you about listening. I would talk to you about the fact that not only are you blessed, because, well, of course, in Genesis 12, God came to Abraham and said, I will bless you. But what else did he say there? And through you, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Yes, we are blessed, but what are we doing with that blessing? What are we in our conference doing with the blessing other than counting it? We can't outgive God, and if He is a blessing God, which I believe He is, if we will begin to see ourselves as a vessel that can bless others, rather than just simply counting our blessings, we will be amazed at what God will do. Listening to someone is a blessing to them. And feeding back what we hear. Why do I focus on listening? In church planting, it's about getting out from behind the screen. It's about getting out of our doors. It's about going to where other people are and actively listening. And it's in that context that we begin to build relationships. Yes, we are actively listening, and as we find out where people are in their search and their desire to know what brings meaning to life, that's when we can begin to talk to them about Jesus and about God's plan for their life. But we must gain their trust. We must earn the right to listen. And that is something that I believe is at the heart of discipling, whether it's one at a time or of planting churches, is developing relationships that are based on showing genuine friendship through listening and giving value. Keith Byler leads a seminar, and there's 4 A's, actually 3, and I've added the 4th one. There are 4 A's that if you are taking notes, and I'm going to get to my handout here in just a minute, but 4 A's. The first thing that is necessary for all of us, if we're going to plant churches, is we need to be willing to approach. The first A is approach. Because if we stay in a safe place, and we do not approach that person on the street or in the checkout line or our coworker, then nothing is going to happen in light of relationship. So approaching is the first thing, and it's sometimes the scariest thing, because what am I going to do when I approach that person? And the second A is ask. Ask a question. How are you? What's your name? Do you live around here? Hey, do you work here? I mean, there's 1,000 questions that open the door to the beginning of communication. So we approach prayerfully, carefully, pray ahead of time, whatever you need to do. Ask the question, what's the next thing? Admire. Have you ever met anybody who doesn't appreciate a compliment? A like your shoes. Hey, you have a beautiful daughter. Hey, that's a cool shirt. There's 1,000 more questions that you can do to admire. Well, thank you. Yeah, I like yours too. Or, and that's the beginning. Those are the baby steps. And the next step is admit, because usually one question leads to another question. And sooner or later, there's something that you can admit that you either like, that they like, or you agree with something, and yeah, I agree with that, or you're admitting. Or, man, I'm having a rough day, they may say. Well, hey, I understand. I have rough days too. And so those are 4 very simple things that when we step outside of ourselves, our life, where we've been functioning, and we think, God, I want you, would you use me, make me a vessel that you can use? We open ourselves up. But I love what Jesus said when he said, if any man will come to me and drink, what will happen next? How does that verse go on? From them will flow one streams of living water. Are we willing to trust God for that? Are we willing to allow His plan and His purpose for each one of us to become a multi-stream, a multi-blesser, where He blesses us, He is the living water, and yet it will flow from us. We have been privileged to see God raise up 2 churches since 2008. Bridge Bible Church in Kent, and then they sent me, after 2.5 years, this church was on its own, self-supporting, and able to pledge $20,000 a year to the next church plant. So we stepped back, and we put together prayerfully another game plan, which I'll talk about here in a minute, and we prayerfully chose another city about a half an hour away, and we went there. Now, I don't know whether you've caught it or not. I grew up in Delaware. I grew up in a Mennonite community. I grew up in a closed community with a Christian day school, and where we went to church 3 times a week. Wanda grew up in Kentucky. She was in a missionary family, and that's all she's ever known, is being on the mission field. Poor thing. But what happened was we had to make a choice to step away from her first nursing job, from a promising career with Warfel Construction, and believe me, that it was pretty promising back then. And they're still in business today, so chances are I could have stayed right there. But we had to say, hey, this is a choice we have to make, because we believe that God is calling us to do something that we're not really sure what it is. But are we willing to step out in faith to plant churches? It takes a step of faith. We can't just do business as usual and expect that churches will magically appear. What happens magically is churches close their doors over and over again. I just heard about Utica the other night, and it broke my heart. Didn't you say that the Presbyterian churches are being given over to...
Yeah, there's many churches given over to Islam.
To the Muslims to make them into mosque. I've lived in the Middle East, folks. I've seen hundreds of places where churches are now mosque. That is the strategy. Sometimes by force. Here we're fast asleep. We're the frogs in the boiling water. And the churches in America are being given over. Superstructures are being given over, city after city, to become mosque. And meanwhile, we fret. What's happening? Why are they coming here? Because we're not going to them, I believe, is one reason. But the other reason is I believe God wants us to step up. He will build His church, but He will use our hands and feet and our mouthpieces to do that. And I am excited to be back in Conservative Conference, hearing the message that I hear today, 20 years after I left the Conservative Conference, that we want to grow and we want to plant churches. Because I believe, not only because I've seen it, but I believe that it's possible. Does it take sacrifice? Absolutely. We have to lose our life to find it in Him. And I don't know why you're in this seminar this afternoon, whether it's because you've known me for a long time and you just want to see what Ron's going to say, or if you're actually sincerely interested in planting churches. But I'm excited about what this initiative that has been developed over the last several years for Conservative Conference. And I know that it's because someone was willing to apprentice me 35 years ago that I learned how to plant churches. And I'm excited now to be on the team in Conservative Conference where we can apprentice, where we can coach, where we can walk with you every step of the way and share with you what we've learned, the mistakes we've made, as well as tips that we believe will help you in becoming effective church planters. Remember though, unless the Lord builds the house, we labor in vain. So I am not going to share with you a perfect formula. I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have done, some of the things that I have learned in the last, specifically in the last 10 years as we've planted 2 churches that planted 2 more churches here in Northeast Ohio. Because it's in a culture very similar to where you are. And yet you may learn something here tonight, this afternoon, that will help you as you talk about this and pray about this. I have a handout here. I think we'll probably need all of them. And we'll just get going here. Any questions so far before we get started? I'm supposed to be done like 5 till 5, right? Yeah. Okay. There's about 8 things, 8 categories that I'm going to share with you as we go here. And the first one, let me just say this. On Equiper that CMC has put together, I did about a 14 minute video about a year and a half ago, right after we came back this way. Has anybody watched that by any chance? On Equiper, there's a church planting video. I would encourage you to watch that because I share with you in that video some of the things that are preliminaries to what I'm going to share with you today. But just like when you get married and you begin to talk about a family, and then you begin to plan for that family, there is a stage of conception where you're dreaming about it and actually maybe even beginning to work towards becoming pregnant, and then your wife conceives. And so we kind of call this the conceptual stage. And so today we're going to look at just some things about the conceptual stage of church planting. And again, I'm putting things out here that I have used, that have worked for me as we planted Bridge Bible Church and we planted Wellspring Bible Church. The first thing there, and whether you can see this up here or on your paper, but what I said earlier, unless the Lord builds the house, we labor in vain. Something that begins, it has to begin with prayer. And we need to develop a personal prayer life. What does that mean when it comes to planting churches? That means to begin asking and seeking God to show us how He would like us to plant a church and how He wants to change us as we think about and pray about and talk about planting a church. There may be areas in our life that need some inventory and some possible restructuring or cleansing. I shared a little bit ago about areas in my life that God dealt with, and there may be areas in yours. That's one thing that I'm excited about. The assessment process that we are offering is we will sit down with you and we will look at 17 different areas in your life and relationship and how you handle finances and everything else, all confidentially. And we will walk with you through that self-discovery. And if there's areas that need some effort, some help, or some encouragement, or maybe here's a book that you can read that will answer some of your questions, or maybe you're struggling in your relationship with your spouse or whatever, we want to be there in a confidential way that will help you tune up. I mean, if you're getting ready to go on a trip, what do you do with your car? At least I do. I try to either look it over myself or run it into the shop and ask a trusted mechanic to say, hey, look under the hood, change the oil, check the belts, fluid levels, tire tread, or anything cracked, broken underneath before I go 600 miles or 1,000 miles. Because I don't want to get halfway there and something that if I would have just paid attention before I left could have been addressed and handled and not caused any breakdown along the way. It's like to begin and pray and fast for God's vision for the new church. And gather your family, gather your friends around, and begin to make this a matter of prayer. Find a place in your target community to begin praying for the new church. Again, I cannot say enough about asking God for direction and wisdom and insight. And I believe he says if we seek him, we'll find him when we seek him with all our hearts. And if he is laying on your heart to become a church planter, then talk right back to him and just lay it out. And as he brings things to your mind, or maybe as you're reading the passages of Scripture and your devotions or whatever, pray it back to him. And recruit and train a committed intercessory prayer team. The idea of gathering others around. What does Jesus say? Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'll be in the midst. And I'm going to build my church. I know Matthew 18 is where that verse comes from, and that's in the place of reconciliation. What does he want to do to the world and to your neighborhood? He wants to reconcile them to himself. So we gather around, we meet in his name, and we begin to cry out to him, asking him. Here's the idea of how do we start this? How do we get started? Write out core values. What do you believe is God's heart for you as his follower? Is a value reconciliation? Is there a value of compassion or love? Just make a list of your core values and formulate a mission statement. For instance, at Wellspring Bible Church, our mission statement was encounter Jesus, embrace community, engage culture. Where I'm at today at Cornerstone Community Chapel, our mission statement is calling all people into a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ. Cultivating a community for maturing and multiplying disciples. Thirdly, creating a culture of compassion. What did Jesus come to do but repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near? He called disciples, and he also, as he began his public ministry, he stood up in the temple and he read from Isaiah. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach the good news, to proclaim freedom to the captive, to give sight to the blind, to set at liberty the oppressed, and to declare the year of the Lord's favor. We cannot improve on what Christ has set out to do. So there's no reason we need to be the Wily Phox and try to figure out some type of really intelligent, catchy mission statement. We can be like the old Hedgehog who does the same thing every time. Call people to Jesus. Create community like the world cannot. And show compassion as only Jesus could, because he lives within us. These are things that I believe need to be some part of our mission statement. And then we develop a vision statement as we're praying together. And maybe you're doing this by yourself. Do it anyway. Develop a vision statement. This year, I want to see God move in this way. 1, 2, 3 goals. Whatever. But get started. You can think about it forever, but if you don't put a pen to paper and say, God, this is where I'm going to step forward in faith. You may change it in 2 months, but get started. What do we do when we want to lose weight? What do we do when we want to exercise? We have to get started. And if we don't, nothing happens. Develop an overall strategy. Okay, how do we do that? Well, I think there are several things here. We identify our primary ministry group. Who am I? Do I speak multiple languages, or do I just speak one language? Well, maybe I better start with my own people in my own language. Okay, that's part of the strategy. Identify your primary ministry group. Lord, who are you laying on my heart to minister to? Is it the elderly? Is it children? Is it youth? Is it families? Because we have a family. What is it, Lord, that you want me to begin praying for and identify? determine the new church's ministry profile. What's that going to look like? Are we going to focus on the nuclear family? Are we going to focus on college age people? Who are we going to focus on? Design a ministry flowchart, how it will kind of work itself out throughout the week. And again, each one is different. But we have to think about these things. We have to pray about these things. Otherwise, we don't know where to start. I tell you a heartbreaking story. My son was recruited by a internationally known church planting organization. My son is be 30 years old. He's a professional musician, incredible worship leader. And I hated to see him go, but he was recruited by this organization and hired. And they put him with a church planter who was a great speaker. And they sent him to San Francisco 5 years ago. And I was excited for him. They sold their house, they took off and they went. And we said goodbye. It was kind of hard to see him go, knowing that the baby was going to come along and that kind of thing. But there they went. 5 months into it, he called me and said, "Dad, how long should I hang on to this?" He said, "Nothing's happening." I said, "Well, tell me what is happening." He said, "My job is to build relationships with the musicians, the artists, and to slowly bring them, to Jesus and to build a worship team." And he said the other guy his job is to spearhead the church plant. He's the pastor. He's the church planter. I'm the worship leader. He said, but what lately has been happening is he's asking me what he thinks, what I think he should do. He said, "Dad, I have my ideas, but he's the guy that's been vetted, and he's supposed to lead this, and he doesn't know what to do." I share that story with you. It's a heartbreaking story. They shut the church plant down because this guy, although he's a great speaker, he was not what we call a framer. Some of you, anybody here framing carpenters? Okay. I mean, if I were to try to figure out how to remodel my house, I would talk to Carl because he does that in his sleep. Okay? Well, I hope not, but you know what I mean. It's something that he's trained to do. As we think about these things and develop a strategy, the idea of being assessed and knowing what our gifts are very important, and it's going to make a difference how we visionize and plan together. Why would we develop a timeline as part of the strategy?
Make sure the steps get done.
Yeah, to build accountability into it. Because if you aim at nothing, what did we learn today? You hit it every time. Definition of insanity: doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. To plant a church is just like planting a garden. You make a plan, strategy, and your timeline, and you follow it. Otherwise, nothing gets done. Carefully and realistically set goals for the birth of the church. And that's something, again, goals are made to be massaged and changed, but if you don't set goals, nothing happens. And so that's very important. Okay, third thing here, partnership. Locate other sponsoring groups of churches. Well, no one would really want to work with us, would they? That's called unbelief. Just share a quick story. Our second church plant in Northeast Ohio, we stepped out. Bridge Bible Church, our first church, was willing to give us $20,000 for 3 years. Their commitment in faith was $20,000 a year, and plus they wanted to send their teens on mission trips with us and things like that. We went back to Maranatha Bible Church, who was our parent church for Bridge Bible Church, and they got on board with us because they believe that churches ought to be planting churches. And then through God's divine sovereignty and providence, I had made some friends in Christian and Missionary Alliance Central District office and the church planning side of things, and they got on board with us. Lo and behold, I presented our launch plan, our idea that we had put together, our strategy, and they bought it. They bought into it, and they pledged to get behind us as well. They asked for something in return. I needed to defend my doctrine, which I did for the Christian Missionary Alliance, and thankfully they affirmed us as someone they wanted to work with. And secondly, they asked me to become an assessor, a consultant for them. And so numerous times a year, for several years, I would go to Beulah Beach up on Lake Erie. Usually it seemed like it was about 10 below zero. And we would spend 4 days, long days, where we would assess 2, 3, 4, 5 couples at a time who were being assessed for candidacy as the leaders of church planting teams. And it's with joy that I look back on that experience of several years, a few years ago, and I see churches planted in Cleveland and throughout the Midwest and south of here as well, Dayton, places like that, that we were instrumental in helping these couples to find their way and determine whether or not it was God's will for them to take the lead in a church planting team. And how exciting that is to look back on that and to see these people doing well in leading. And there were others that we said, you know, we love you, we see, but there's some things that need to be worked on. Maybe wait 18 months to address these things and then evaluate again. And they did. And today they're in the ministry. And there were others that we said, I don't think you're cut out to be the leader of a church planting team. And they were heartbroken at the same time. I think they're thankful today that they didn't get saddled with that. Anyway, I want to. There are churches. The last church that we planted, we had a Mennonite church, Christian Missionary Alliance, and 3 non-denominational churches, 1 chapel, and 2 other churches that got behind us from a financial perspective, from a prayer perspective, and they sent teams of young people in to help us do the outreach. I got to tell you one story though about the teams very quickly. We were in Alliance, Ohio. We started in a bowling alley, and these teams came in and helped to spruce up and paint and clean up the bowling alley, which opened doors for us to have Bible studies there with the people who were running the bowling alley. And we met many people through there that to this day, you know, they'll bring up spiritual questions if I run into them. And then we moved from there into, of all places, a funeral home. And we had core team training on Sunday evenings in the funeral home. If anybody got out of line, we just sent them downstairs. And, you know, we talked about the dangers of the crematorium. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, the Lord opened doors. Then moved us to what was had been a real estate office, and that's where we launched the church. But we outgrew that facility, and we couldn't hold everybody. And so we began to look around and pray. A year earlier, I had met with the superintendent of the mall in Alliance. And she was very standoffish. She said, I'm Catholic. We don't want any churches in here. I said, well, hey, just let us know. I said, if you need any volunteers for some of your events. And lo and behold, she took me up on that one day. She called me. She said, hey, I'm having a back-to-school event or something like that. Can you guys come in? I don't want any preaching, but you can have a table down at the other end. I said, can we wear shirts? Yeah, you can wear shirts. What do you want us to do? Face paint. So we're there and we're just loving on people. We're painting faces and just doing whatever, helped her set up, helped her tear down. And people were asking us, what are you guys doing? Where are you from? Well, you know, we could answer that question. And a little bit later, we brought in these teams and we cleaned windows. We picked up cigarette butts in the parking lot. We even started cleaning storerooms to the disgruntledness of the sending church. What are you guys doing? Long story short, I went back to that lady a year later. We were outgrowing our space. And she said, Ron, she said, we've been watching you. She said, you're not like other churches. And we want you in here. And they had said no to about 5 other churches of being in the mall. And they gave us a prime location, very low rent, very affordable. And that Wellspring Bible Church still is in the mall next to JCPenney's to this day. And we've continued that relationship with the mall where if they needed something, we'd host it or we'd help them. And they've done the same for us. It's just been a wonderful relationship. And there's countless opportunities to pray with people, love on people, both staff and people coming through the mall. And Wellspring, praise God, is prospering today. I need to keep moving here. And the next one, leadership. Recruit and train your launch team. How do you do that? Believe me, if you share the vision of what God is laying on your heart, and as people ask questions, You may have to step in front of Sunday school classes. You may have to ask permission to come present to elders of other churches. You may, you're going to talk about it because God is going to build this passion for what He is calling you to do in your heart. And it's just like falling in love. You can't keep quiet about it. At least that's how it was with me when I fell in love with Wanda. I mean, I had this girl and she was beautiful, and man, I was looking for an opportunity to tell people about that. Well, what's that got to do with church planting? When we get on mission with Jesus and we begin to see Him open doors and hey, how's it going? What you up to? Oh man, I've been doing this thing. Well, what thing is that? Well, I feel like the Lord is calling me to plant a church. What do you mean? How do you do that? Well, hey, why don't you come to one of our training sessions? And you invite people in, and I'd be happy to sit down with you and show you and tell you what we have done in training sessions. One of the tools that we have used is out here on the table, Rosedale's table. It's called Shape. How many of you have ever been through Shape? Excellent resource, excellent tool put together by Lyndon Good and Gary Troyer, I think, had his hands in that. And he's Gary Troyer, at 59 years old, died of liver cancer, but he had an incredible impact upon my life. But you recruit and train your launch team and assign launch team roles and responsibilities. Well, how does that work? Pray in your prayer that God would raise up people around you that know better how to do the things that need to be done than you do. What do I mean by that? Ask God for an accountant. Someone who loves to handle finances and can do it with integrity. Well, maybe you are the accountant. Well, ask God for someone who's gifted at speaking or has music ability or whatever. Ask and it'll be given. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it'll be open. I think so often we don't think to ask. And so we don't have because we don't ask, the Bible says. So if Christ wants to build His church and He'll be with us through the whole endeavor, then when we begin to develop leadership and that kind of thing, do you think He'll raise up people around us? Absolutely. I've seen it happen time and time again. And it's just amazing. About the time you don't think anything is happening, wait just a little bit longer. God is never late. His timing is always perfect. He's bringing you to that crisis of faith where you're going to give it to Him one more time. Think of the feeding of the 5,000. Did the disciples, were they able to feed the 5,000? No. But Jesus invited them to bring what they had to Him. And then He created a new beginning. That's how our Lord loves to work. And that's how I've seen Him work over and over again in church planting. But some of the practical things. You're going to have those issues that people disagree, have different views. Scripture teaches us how to walk through those things. If at points you don't agree, pray. Pray some more. Don't just throw up a wall and say, well, I'm done here. Give it to God. Allow Him to bring harmony. Be willing to admit that maybe you don't quite understand. Go back and revisit. Collect many bios and photos of each teammate and spouse. That's very practical. And why you want to do that? Because as you begin to develop websites and things like that, but what do we do? We get out and we walk through our target community. We finalize the demographic survey. Why is that important? Because just like finances, you need to know what's there. Just like your community, who is there? There's all kinds of resources online. But there's also, you can pay $250 and get a beautiful demographic study done. Why is that important? Number one, it helps you to pray. Number two, it helps you to know who's there. Number three, it helps you to present your vision to other people. And they can understand that you know what you've been praying about and you're looking at. And it helps you to communicate to others why you feel God is calling you there. Just conducting that community needs survey. What does our community need? Are there teachers? Are there public schools? Who's loving on the teachers? Are there children there that don't get to eat on the weekend? Just ask the questions. Wonder out loud. Go in listening with 2 ears and talking less, but asking questions. and praying, prayerfully going and asking God to show you what He sees. Asking Him to help you hear what He hears. Because there are needs all around us that we can begin to meet one at a time. And there's practical things like select a name for the new church. Where did Bridge Bible Church come from? Where did Wellspring Bible Church come from? Right during that time, they were cracking and fracking everywhere. Marcellus Shale, farmers, agrarian community out in Alliance, Ohio. They know what a well is. They know how important water is. They know how important oil or gas is for their ongoing economy. So it's a no-brainer to think about a well. What does Jesus say? The scriptures say about Jesus being the wellspring of life. It seemed to fit. The Lord seemed to bring those ideas and concepts together. It was met with approval from the core team. Hey, let's run with this. And that was how that name was found. Are there other well springs? Yes, there are. You don't really have to invent a new wheel every time. Church colors are important as well. Put some thought into it. Maybe someone on your team is artistic. Anybody here feel like you're artistic? You're artistic? A little bit. Anybody else? Anybody here musical? Yeah. Anybody here love numbers? All right. Think about it. Think about your church, your team, your community. Begin to pray. Lord, raise up the team around me. Well, I could never lead a team. Well, ask God to raise that person up as well. Again, we will not plant churches if we just say, well, I couldn't do that. But we begin to step out in faith believing that that's God's vision. And His heart is not willing that any should perish, but that all come to repentance. And we die to self and we move forward. And trusting God to raise the necessary funds. And I don't care whether it's a house church or what I'm talking about here is, finding a building and that kind of thing and starting a church. You maybe say, well, I work full time or I'm bivocational or this or that, and I don't know how this would all work. The last time I checked, God is a master figure-outer of those kind of things. And that doesn't change the fact that He wants to build His church. So if we give ourselves to Him saying, Lord, show me how to step through this. And, hey, would you guys pray for me? Would you pray with me about what I believe God is laying on our hearts for our community or that community 5 miles away or whatever it is? See what happens. He may surprise us. There's several other things there, but I want to get to the last slide here. Begin estimating and projected startup costs for the church plant. How do we handle our home finances or a future remodel we'd like to do or that new car that we'd like or another car or upcoming school expenses or whatever? We have to think about it. We have to talk about it. We have to wrestle with it. We have to pray about it. And then we have to trust God to lead us. And again, you'll be amazed. I was hired by Maranatha Bible Church to go plant Bridge Bible Church, and I thought, this is so cool. I'm going to be hired to go do this. Right after they hired me, Steve Marshall, my mentor and coach from Maranatha, picked up the phone and said, hey, Ron, just forgot to tell you, but you need to raise $80,000. So I said, what? I thought I was just hired to go plant a church. My purpose is to just pray about it and commit it to the Lord. And within that year, based on the people that God brought into the core team, and they began to give. And they began to give generously and hilariously towards the vision. Money follows vision. Without vision, people cast off restraint. They don't care. But money does follow vision. We didn't have to have fundraisers. That's something I think we really need to strike from our practices and our traditions. Yeah. That's so much a part of who we are. Oh, let's have a fundraiser so we can go to Costa Rica or whatever. Let's just pray and ask God to raise up what is needed to plant a church. And we step out in faith. and we talk about it, and we present it to God. We present it to those people in faith who He brings into our life. That $80,000 was not a problem. I've seen some incredible things. I've seen a carpenter who had built a house, sold a house. He wanted to tithe on it. He walked up and handed me, he had sold it for $250,000. He handed me a $25,000 check. Another anonymous donor heard about what was going on, sends a check for 20 grand. Where does money come? I don't know, but God knows. I saw the same thing happen for earthquake relief recovery in Turkey. Our conference came up with between donors almost $500,000 during that short time that I was overseeing that. Now, you say, well, I just want to plant a house church. Okay, that's fine. Plant. Multiply. But don't wait and do nothing. When the mandate and the commission is on us and God is on mission. God is on mission. He's out there ahead of us. He's behind us. He is within us. And it's His heart to reach people so that they don't spend an eternity away from Him. I get passionate about that because I know He saved me. Bless you. And I know that He wants to save you and your household. Think about that one. Do a study. You want to encourage yourself? Look at how God works in households throughout Scripture. He wants to save Abraham and his household. And He wanted to save the Philippian jailer and his household, and Cornelius and his household. And on and on and on it goes. That's one place to pray. Begin praying. Pray for your household or the household of your neighbors and ask God to begin to bring together households to save. Watch yourself, your wife, your children, or your husband and your children. Or if you don't have children, pray for children. That's called biological growth, multiplication. But don't leave it to that, okay? Adopt a family. Adopt a neighbor. Spiritually. Spend time. I mean, some of the stuff that we've heard this afternoon gets me so excited from our guest, our main speaker. He is just hitting the nail on the head over and over and over again. We don't have to go out shaking our fingers and wagging our tongues at people because they're unbelievers. Jesus, in the rhythm of modeling the Great Commission for each of us, sat and ate with those who were curious about Him. Matthew the tax collector, Zacchaeus, and others. He was accused of all kinds of things. But in the rhythm of his life, he says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone will hear my voice and open the door, I will come in, and what will I do? I'll eat. I'll sit down. What a beautiful example for us as we move forward. All right, I'm out of time, and I'm sorry we don't have a lot of time left. But this verse here, coming out of Luke 9:57, I believe. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To another he said, follow me. But he said, Lord, let me first go bury my father. And Jesus said to him, leave the dead to bury their dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. Yet another said, I will follow you, Lord, but let me first say farewell to those at my house. Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. I've been a farmer just enough to know that when you drop that plow on the ground and you ratchet back the throttle and you head for the other end of the field, that's how plowing gets done. How does church planting get done? But it's dropping the plow in the ground and going for it. We said goodbye 35 years ago to my parents and friends and family, and there were tears. And yet I praise God that today I can go into many communities and I have brothers and sisters that would welcome me into their homes. Whether it's in Turkey or in Ohio or Albuquerque, I've gained a lot, and I know that I will spend eternity with those people who I had to say goodbye to. We go forth with weeping, but we return praising and bearing sheaves of grain. The kingdom of God is dynamic, and He wants to multiply it in CMC. And I hope that you'll join me in this journey.
Thank you, Ron. One of the questions that I get, probably the most prominent question I've gotten in the last 2 years about this conversation and planting new disciple-making churches is how? How do you do it? And that's why we've asked Ron just to walk us through some of the tips and steps that he experienced. But also I want to say this. It is our philosophy that as we plant churches in this next decade, that we're not locked into a model. We believe that it will take all kinds of models to reach all kinds of people. So the organic, Neil Cole model, legit missional communities, a church like I pastor, a box church. You know, we're Lord willing going to be launching a campus this fall in neighboring community. So it's not a formula, although there are some best practices that will help us, and I think that's what you've laid out for us. And so thank you for being here, your interest, your passion. I'm going to pray for us. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to let you go. If you have questions, just hang around here. Ron and I will be here to answer any questions you have. If you feel like God is calling you to plant or your church and you're not sure what your next step is, what we want to do is assign you a coach, somebody that can sit down with you, start mapping out, assessing, equipping, like what your next steps are. We want to come alongside of you in any way that we can. So be sure to talk to one of us. Jerry, just raise your hand. So Jerry Souder here I'm the CMC Church Planting Catalyst. And the last couple of years, my role has been to sort of help us formulate a vision, and we've done that. And I'm actually handing off now. Jerry's going to be taking my role. When are we handing off? In October, I think.
October, yeah.
Or sooner. Thanks for volunteering. So we're excited about that. I hope you'll get to know Jerry. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for the Great Commission, the platform you've entrusted to us, God. And I pray that in this next decade, God, with your help, we'll be able to plant at least 50 new disciple-making churches that can change this world for Christ with the gospel. I pray that you'd raise up church planters. God, you'd help us to take a step and to share the gospel, to share our faith, to see entire families, communities, or this world to be changed for Jesus' sake, to make Christ famous. Would you help us, we pray. Thank you for Ron and Wanda, their faithfulness and their journey and everything you've done in their lives, the tremendous testimony of just seeing how you've worked. Thank you. And we commit it all to you in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you all. 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 Thank you all.